you all got the little introduction to Sue in the agenda. So Sue, why don't you go ahead and just
Okay,
take it away?
forgive me while I get start. I put together a little PowerPoint that I wanted to share, so it's going to take me a second to get it up.
That does
You can
not.
see my screen before it's there. Now, can you
Yes,
see the nice presentation?
yes, yes. Beautifully
And
done.
forgive me if this is nerdy. I'm a nerd. Um, so I will say, oh, this is interesting. I have to hide it because you guys are blocking my view. Okay. So Anne asked me, what does EPA do with regard to water in California? And I was thinking a lot. So I'm going to do a very quick overview, mostly of the Clean Water Act that I worked in. And I have to put in the disclaimer, one, that I don't work for EPA anymore. I'm only speaking for myself from my memories. And two, that while I'm in this presentation mode, I can't see any of you. So yell if you need something.
Okay.
Okay, so let's see if I can change page. Okay, so EPA is organized out of headquarters in Washington. Lee Zeldin is the new administrator, and the administrator oversees 12 program and functional offices and 10 regional offices, which have similar structure to this. And I worked in the San Francisco office, which is Region 9, the Southwest, which covers California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, 148 federally recognized tribes, and the US Pacific Territories. I think I mentioned before that I had started my career working in Superfund, and then I shifted to the Water Division in 2007. And the Water Division work is closely supported by the boxes and dashes, including the Enforcement and Compliance Division. They have the job of going out and collecting penalties for violations. Um, the Lab Services Division that does all of the monitoring and analysis. They do lab inspections. They certify labs that are doing drinking water quality and wastewater treatment analysis. They do a lot more. And the Office of Regional Counsel, which makes sure we don't get in trouble, or they try to. So in addition to the Water Division getting support, we also give support to other divisions. And some of the things that I've always enjoyed doing, EPA's emergency response group are the people who are out at the Palisades and Eaton fires right now, cleaning up all the hazardous materials and waste. And there's people from all the divisions that can volunteer to help. The Water Division and the Air Division work together to address impacts from transport and deposition of pollutants like atmospheric mercury, soil eroded from agricultural practices that deposits elsewhere. EPA's Environmental Review Division, which is part of this group here, is the lead for reviewing any federal actions that are going through the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act process. And water is asked to provide subject matter expertise as needed. So some of the ones I got to work on were the Sites Reservoir in the North Central Valley, where we're looking at development plans. Is this going to be built on a wetland? Is there potential for mercury methylation in the reservoir waters when it's built, or cyanobacteria? Other examples are US Forest Service lands, the forest management practices. Are they going to allow grazing? And will that grazing impact the water? How are they doing clear cutting? Are they spraying new plantings with Roundup to prevent anything else from growing? Yes, that's what they used to do. Dam operation permitting is done by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, and they were the ones that were doing the permitting of the Klamath River dams that I got to work on for over a decade, which was great. So that's kind of the big picture. And I want to dive in now to water. Oops, and I went way too far. That was kind of bad. Here, let's go to that one. Okay. So the Water Division administers the Clean Water Act that are shown in blue. This is our organizational structure in Region 9. The Safe Drinking Water Act are things that are in green. The Marine Protection Research and Sanctuaries Act, I honestly don't have much knowledge of, and I haven't highlighted how it fits here. But I will say common elements to what EPA does is we delegate authority, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act authority to states, territories, tribes. that one, demonstrate they have the capacity to oversee the laws, and two, have programs that are at least as strict as EPA's regulations. EPA provides congressionally appropriated funds to support these partners in doing all the required activities. And EPA retains oversight, both fiscal oversight and technical oversight for the work that is done by the states or tribes that are delegated. And so EPA's goal is to be involved enough to help states, tribes, and territories produce approvable work. So this means a lot of behind the scenes efforts to help them be successful. Okay, so again, I'm going to focus on the Clean Water Act, the blue ones, because that's what I'm most familiar with. Clean Water Act is to protect and restore surface waters from pollutant impacts. It is water quality focused. EPA has no authority over water quantity or water rights. The states have that. Similarly, the Clean Water Act does not directly address groundwater. Sometimes we can weasel our way into it, but the Safe Drinking Water Act and the states have authorities over groundwater. So the Clean Water Act is implemented using what we call a water quality based approach that I want to go over with you. If I can get it to advance, there it goes. Okay, so this flow path is what we call the water quality based approach, and it starts out with developing water quality standards. So EPA develops what are called ambient water quality criteria. So it's like standards, but they're recommended. And they address impacts of a pollutant to people or to aquatic life or aquatic dependent wildlife. And then the states or tribes or territories must establish their own water quality standards. And they have to be at least as protective as EPA's ambient water quality criteria. So they develop standards for individual water bodies, and they have to be protective of all designated uses. So if they say a particular water body is going to be maybe used for drinking water and maybe used for direct contact recreation and to support certain species of aquatic life, the standards have to protect all those things. They have to be the most protective of all. So EPA reviews and approves all of the standards that are developed. And once the standards are in place, the Clean Water Act requires states to then monitor the waters and assess the waters and produce a list. Every 2 years, they have to produce a list giving the status of all the tested waters, and they designate them in different categories. The water is impaired, it's not meeting standards. It's threatened, it's still meeting, but you can tell it's getting worse. It's high quality, meaning it's meeting all criteria, or there's insufficient information. And this list is sometimes called the impaired waters list, and sometimes it's called the integrated report because it's more than just impaired waters. And the impaired waters are Section 303D of the Clean Water Act. So sometimes you'll also hear it called 303D list. And like everything else, EPA approves all these things or disapproves every report that comes out every 2 years from every state. So the list also has to prioritize which water bodies the state recognizes need to be advanced for further work for developing TMDLs. And I want to talk about that next. But before that, I just want to say the integrated report is a huge effort for any state, especially for California, which is just enormous. And California has this terrific visualization tool to help you go straight to a water body and see, is it impaired? What's it impaired for? How long has it been that way? It's a great tool, and I've got it pulled up afterwards if you want to look at it. So then the next step for those high priority waters is to do a TMDL. And you might say, what is a TMDL? A TMDL is an action plan to restore water quality. And they define how much of each pollutant a water body can tolerate and still meet the water quality standards. So you can see the list here. You have to identify the pollutants and the sources of the pollutants, the applicable water quality standards, the pollutant loads that are coming in from all the different sources, how much can be in the water and have the water still meet water quality standards. Then identify the allocations, which are usually reductions of how things need to be adjusted to bring the water back into a compliance. And then provide an implementation plan that identifies the actions needed to reduce the pollutant loading so that the water body will come back into compliance within a reasonable period of time. And there's two types of pollutants that are mentioned in the TMDL. There's what are called point source pollutants, and they are addressed by federal NPDES permits. And then there's non-point source pollutants. And I'm going to just go into both of those in a minute, but first I just wanted to highlight of local interest. In December, the San Diego Regional Board approved the Lower Tijuana River TMDL alternative, which is an advanced restoration plan, addressing indicator bacteria and trash. And I think they think those two measures were very strategic in that if those are meeting, most of the other problems are going to be addressed too. A TMDL alternative, it's a type of interim plan. It requires less approvals than a full TMDL, and it gives the state more flexibility to make adjustments without having to go through all kinds of approvals to make that adaptive management. However, if the water quality improvements are not seen in a reasonable period of time, then they have to go back and do the formal full-blown TMDL. Once approved, these TMDLs, these water quality improvement plans, go to implementation. And again, the two groups are NPDES permits for point sources and non-point sources. So what are NPDES permits and what are point sources? A point source, as described in the Clean Water Act, is any discernible, confined, and discrete conveyance, including but not limited to pipes, ditches, channels, tunnels, other things that pollutants can be discharged from. So this includes industrial facility discharges, municipal wastewater systems, stormwater systems, and some agricultural sources like concentrated animal feeding operations or CAFOs. But it explicitly does not include agriculture or return flows from irrigated ag or stormwater discharges from ag. So this NPDES permit program, it's a federal permitting system to manage pollutant loads from these point sources. And like most things, EPA wants to delegate the authority to our states, tribes, and territories. So California is responsible for NPDES permits for most of California's permits. EPA reviews and approves them. And sometimes you will often see them combine with what the state calls waste discharge requirements, which are the state's legal authorities to permit something. So you might have a facility that has both federal and state requirements in a combined NPDES WDR permit. Permits for discharges to federal ocean waters, so beyond state waters, are issued only by EPA. And I put a couple of examples here at the bottom. They tend to be wastewater treatment plant outfalls and other things that have outfalls more than a mile out, like Point Loma, wastewater treatment plant outfall. So when EPA approves a TMDL, after the state has submitted it, approved it themselves, given it to EPA, and we approve it, any point source and its load allocation that was identified in the TMDL automatically goes into effect. So the identified NPDES permit is considered legally adjusted automatically and incorporates those load reductions. This is called direct implementation, and the permit does not have to be reissued or redlined, striked. It's something that the lawyers and program people have to track. Okay, so that's point source. What is non-point source? Let's go there. So non-point source pollution is basically everything else. It's pollutants carried by runoff that are not addressed by NPDES permits. So that can include runoff from stormwater runoff from small communities or rural communities that don't have stormwater collection systems. It can be runoff from forests. We learned that it's runoff from agricultural practices other than confined animal feeding operations, large facilities, which can include small animal facilities or lots of other ag related activities. The Clean Water Act directs states to have non-point source pollution management programs and a 5-year EPA approved plan describing what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. And California has a very robust non-point source program and non-point source policies. Very few other states have anything close to that. California has the Porter-Cologne Act that gives it regulatory authority to protect any surface waters from pollutants, and something called the non-point source implementation and enforcement policy explains how Porter-Cologne allows the state to develop and implement programs and issue waste discharge requirements, the state permits, to compel landowners to manage non-point source pollution loads coming off their land. EPA also requires states to spend at least half of their annual federal funding for non-point source programs on the ground projects that implement improvements in non-point source pollution. So California's non-point source program annually solicits projects for on the ground work that they then fund with grant programs. So you can see they've got grant funding, they've got a tab for their plans and policies, how they implement things, their reports, mostly to us. So the non-point source management program plans, California's plan is, I think it's great. I got to oversee it for a decade. It should identify the state's priority issues and the management measures that are going to be used to implement those non-point source program priorities. California's current plan that's shown the cover page and table of contents here, it identifies numerous topics, what they're going to be focused on. You can see there's ag, there's forestry, there's confined animal facilities, which are just slightly different from federal CAFOs, meaning they're for anything smaller than a CAFO, which can still be quite big. On-site wastewater treatment, such as septic systems, and then down the targeted water bodies. So I thought you might be interested in seeing for San Diego Regional Board. Oops, I did that again. Go back. Their targeted water bodies, they have 4. Lower reach of the Tijuana River, San Diego Bay, Santa Margarita River, and San Mateo Creek. And so then the question will be, since this 5-year plan expires this summer, and they're actively working on their new one now, I know from chatting with them, the state board should be putting out a draft for public comment, and we'll be able to, this spring, and if people are interested, they can see what San Diego's proposing for work for the next 5 years. So how much funding does EPA provide to states to do all this work that I've described? Congress allocates funds for EPA to distribute to the states and territories. Headquarters calculates the amount of those funds that each state gets based on size, population, number of water bodies, etc. And the states, California gets the most, but I will point out the states have to provide a match for all the money they get from the government. And for non-point source work, they have to provide a match of what's called 40%. So their total costs, the federal funds can only be 60% or less. So California gets the most funding, as I said, and in recent years, for everything that's green and the non-point and the NPDES program, California has gotten about 11 million, and then the non-point source program has gotten 9 million each year. And again, out of this 9 million for non-point source, more than half of that, at least $1 more than half of that, has to go to on-the-ground implementation. For all of this money, California's match has to be $12 million. So the total that they have to spend is closer to 32 million. to receive this much from the government. Again, EPA oversees the use of all the funds. Each state has to develop a detailed work plan with negotiations of what milestones and tasks they're going to accomplish during the year. And I will say the funds mostly go towards the salaries for staff that do the work. EPA fiscal oversight is in addition to the technical oversight I've described, and our approval of final work products. Their approval, I'm not them anymore. So Congress and the Clean Water Act also provide a very significant line of funding called the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, or the CWSRF. And this is a capitalization grant, meaning that the government gives the state money every year and the state gives out loans that get repaid. So the fund keeps building. And these are for low interest loans for high priority infrastructure projects like wastewater treatment plants, taking communities that are on septic systems off. So one project recently was for the city of Malibu. The entire city was on septic systems, which were having a huge impact on waters and coastal waters. So they got a Clean Water SRF grant to help put the city on to a wastewater treatment plant. So in recent years, this shows California has received about $53 million each year. And now I'm going to shift very, very briefly to the Safe Drinking Water Act to tell you about the Drinking Water SRF. So, oops, I did it again. I went too far. Sorry for being clunky. Wow, I'm having trouble with this. Okay, there we go. So Safe Drinking Water Act, like its title, regulates many aspects of providing clean, safe drinking water for the public. It includes protecting the sources, the lakes and rivers, treating the waters to meet the standards, distributing that treated water. EPA also develops the drinking water standards, the analytical methods to test the water. They provide guidance on how to treat the water for certain pollutants and many other activities. And Congress gives funds for doing all these. But I wanted to highlight the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, like the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, is a huge source for infrastructure development. In recent years, California has been getting about $97 million annually for this fund. Last year, states were eligible for disaster relief funds, and California received an additional $52 million because of all the wildfire impacts to drinking water facilities. California's loan program combines federal funds with state funds, prop funds, bond funds, and they do one giant solicitation, and they put all the proposed projects, they identify all the proposed projects, they rank them, and they identify the ones recommended for funding in that particular year in a document called the Intended Use Plan. And the 2024-2025 Intended Use Plan, I noticed 2 projects for San Diego, and one of them was recommended for funding, which is great. So there'll be at least $145 million coming for construction of the Alvarado 2 pipeline extension. Okay, so I've gone probably way over time. So I just want to wrap up and say that is 100,000-foot view of some of the things EPA is involved in. There's lots I haven't mentioned. I'm happy to answer questions or dive into more details if you're curious. And then I just also wanted to highlight that the San Diego County Water Authority's Citizens Water Academy, their spring course applications are due February 28th if you're interested. And with that, I'm going to stop projecting and stop sharing my screen, I think, and check in. Thanks.
I like that, I think. That's something I would say. Are there any questions from anybody? Rita.
Well, I know that, EPA oversees a lot of the testing of water in California.
Mhm.
and the rest of the country, which is really important role. And whenever these standards are brought up, they're argued about. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the water districts always want lower standards rather than higher because of the money, mostly.
You
EPA,
mean more easier to achieve standards?
easier to achieve standards,
Okay. Yeah.
right? I mean, that's been the history of it in reality, not the talk, but the real history. So,
Mhm.
you know, there's been this PFAS thing that's a big deal now.
Yeah.
And I see that your new administrator wants to drop that whole thing, or, you know, supposedly. I guess I'm asking, how much of difference do you see? You've worked through different administrations. How much are they going to be able to change what EPA does effectively in the various administrations, including this one? You said you're not working for them, so you might be able to give us a feeling of how things might go under a new administrator.
So, my perception, based on the last Trump administration, was the states recognize this, and they are the ones we've delegated authority to. So when they develop their own standards, we're like, we're behind you. That's great, but it's their standards. So California has their own standards right now, and they are going to keep those standards in place. And people expect them. You know, people don't want to have to pay money, but boy, do people get mad when they find out there's something in their water that is harmful to them. So I think overall um, they don't want to have to pay for water, you know, as I'm sure we'll talk about in other parts of this meeting. But um, in general, there's support for continuing to protect water quality. And the states recognize that it's their time now to step up and make sure things are sustained in when there's any challenge to what EPA is allowed to do or tasked to do. Did that answer your question?
Well, it sounds optimistic. You know, I just don't know if we know really what's going to be. Yeah, California is a different position than other states. If you live in
Right.
Iowa or something, is your water going to be tested enough?
You know, I think I don't know. We've never been down a place where EPA has been completely shut down, and I hope we don't go there. Um, but you know, in Iowa, they have a lot of agriculture. They have a lot of pesticides in their groundwater, and people don't want to be drinking that. They want to be protected. So, you know, Iowa is they're very proactive. So I think, you know, we've got perceptions in our heads about people who are kind of, don't bother me with that, but they also want everything to be safe. I mean, that's, I think, part of going back is everybody wants to be
Right.
safe.
Some
So
states
I have
like,
my fingers crossed.
I mentioned Iowa, but they have voluntary programs and they really don't really work that well in reality.
I'll defer to you on that because I have not studied Iowa.
Well, whatever. But anyway,
Yeah,
I'm glad
Um,
to feel like
okay,
you have some optimism.
yeah.
Ruth, go ahead.
Thanks, Sue. That was very interesting. Um, if the Tijuana River Valley has been on the radar of the San Diego Regional Board, why have things continued to get worse? And why hasn't there been more outrage from the San Diego Regional Board of the EPA?
So there a couple of things. And again, it's nice to not be an EPA employee to say this. There has been tremendous outrage from a ton of people, including the executive director of the San Diego Regional Board. The problem is EPA is not in a position to fix the problem. The problem is um, Mexico is dumping all of their waste on us, huge amounts of waste. They're not treating it. They are just dumping pollution. So at what point is it the United States' job to collect all that and treat it to keep us safe? That I think is I mean, if you think about a silly example like somebody you live with who doesn't clean up after themselves, if you're always cleaning up after them, they're never going to clean up after themselves. So strategically, how do the United States and Mexico interact to handle that problem? I had somebody say to me recently, you just pay for it and you clean it up and then you figure out who to bill for it. But that means you paid for it. And that has to be Congress, because EPA only has the money Congress gives us for very specific line items. So I think the problem is the people who handle the purse strings to fix it are 3,000 miles away. And all the outrage from all the levels, whether it's EPA or California or the regional board or the community, it has to be loud enough to make Congress want to do something. Because EPA certainly, I mean, California could put all of their money into trying to capture and treat that water, and what would it get them? I think that's the hard part.
That's-
Sorry.
Other question? Any other questions? Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
I was just curious about two things. One was, are there any mechanisms within the EPA to penalize, part of the pollution is industry pollution from our own companies, from companies that are in the United States. I know that's not all the pollution.
Right.
So I was wondering, are there any mechanisms the EPA has to help fine or regulate or help those companies pay for their part? Was one question. Then the other question was earlier, as Rita was asking, it's one thing about the power and all those things and the testing, which I understand comes out of the budget. But when I'm looking at those grants and all that stuff you had documented so nicely, I was just like, does this money come back like from the federal government? Like that was more of my concern now, was just the circle of the federal government funding during this administration. Like
You mean, will the money keep being delivered?
Yeah, isn't that, I mean, I know that has partly to testing, but wouldn't that be as catastrophic as testing if the funds don't come, if not more catastrophic?
So a couple of things. One, you were asking about, I'm already blanking. The funds is a real fear. I mean,
Yeah.
the Trump administration made it very clear in their first round, that they wanted to just remove non-point source pollution from EPA's program. They can't take it out of the Clean Water Act, but they can do what's called zero fund it. So what is the amount of funding it gets? Zero. And there's a number of programs that they would love to zero fund. And I'm sure you've heard the news. This has just been a horrible week for federal workers in all the agencies.
Right.
They're very frightened. Will the money keep coming? That's a huge question, because all those sources of money are things that EPA says we will reimburse the state for. This is our commitment for spending. We'll reimburse you. But boy, when they shut down the Treasury last week, will they get reimbursed? We don't know. So there's just so much question going forward about what money is going to come to who for what programs, and can the new administration, can they cherry pick the programs they like and just zero fund everything else? I guess
Apparently.
we'll have to see.
Mary Lou. Where'd she go?
You're
Okay,
on mute, Mary Lou.
there you are.
There you
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much for your presentation, and we're delighted that you are here with all your expertise. I'm confused about the funding of some of these transboundary efforts from the federal government, because Congress obviously approves funding right now for the international border wastewater treatment plant that is the
Right.
source of the problem, because they can't handle the sewage coming from Mexico, and they actually don't have the funding sources so episodic that they don't have money for maintenance.
Right.
And so, as California is trying to collect tax on the border, a new border entry, to provide money for maintenance. But can you just give us any kind of clarification or clarity, I should say, about this funding process? Because to fund a wastewater treatment plant this way is very
Not smart.
I was going to say something much worse than that, but anyway, Can you just
Yeah.
give us any clarity on this and how we might therefore learn how to lobby more effectively for better funding and funding that lasts over, that we don't have to fight for, at the end of every year for just basic maintenance, because it didn't happen. And
Right.
and this is part of the problem, is inconsistent funding.
I think the easiest answer, and then I'll go against what I say, is no, I don't really know how to do that. But one thing I'll add is that IBWC gets their funding from Congress, and federal agencies are not allowed to pass money between them. So EPA cannot give any of its money to IBWC or to the Forest Service or vice versa, because Congress decided how much we get for each task, and that's all we get. You can't add more to it. So one of the things, and this is totally off the top of my head, and I could be absolutely wrong, is to see if IBWC is set up to be able to pool resources from other parties like the state of California, or I don't know, somebody with a lot of money who wants to help, to be able to accomplish that. I will say, if that is done, Congress will give less and less money every year. So it again is kind of strategic of, if you can get it somewhere else, we're not going to give it to you. That's pretty cynical. I'm sorry, but that, I think, is really how it goes. And it'll be interesting to see how this administration decides to handle it. If they're just like, Mexico's doing a horrible job, we're gonna show them how smart and strong we are, and we're gonna do it. That'd be wonderful. That would be ideal. But yeah.
Yeah,
And I don't think I think Rachel had asked before, I don't think there's any way, and this is my lack of knowledge perhaps, to go back and to penalize US companies that are polluting in other countries. We can certainly do that politically, whether it's, child labor laws, not buying from companies, but I don't think there's laws in the US to punish US companies polluting in other countries.
but the problem is that they're not polluting in other countries, they're polluting into our country.
Yes.
Well, they're polluting in Mexico, and Mexico is discharging into our country.
No, they're
Okay.
polluting into the river that flows into our country. So that's,
Okay. I don't know the details.
Okay, guys, we are going to move on because I have got to get our program planning for the coming year done, so I know what we're going to be doing the rest of the year. So, moving on, thank you so much, Sue. That was really useful, and I have a feeling we're
you,
going to
Sue.
be referring to you again. You're not getting away from this, and it's just, you're
I
doomed.
bet Rita knows more than I do, but okay,
No, I
thank you.
appreciate it. And I'm glad you're optimistic. I'll try to be optimistic, but I'm not really.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear that from you, Rita. Reality is not where we want to go right now. Okay, moving on, program planning. I sent to you the things that we, meaning the few people that were left after our incredibly popular talk from Dr. Prather last week, last month, things that we talked about that we wanted to continue doing. And I want to, first of all, confirm that we are all on board with those things. And then I want to know if there's any suggestions for things that we can add to our list. So, number one was focus on tracking reasons for the rising cost of water. And that is something that is readily doable because we observe the Water Authority and the Metropolitan, and we read articles and we know what's going on. And someone suggested we use urban water management plans from each local water district to evaluate if they're using that was Susan that did that. And the interesting thing about that is I wanted to tell you, I went to a Metropolitan Water District meeting yesterday talking about their Camp 4 progress, which is their plan for climate change accommodation with what they have to do delivering water in Southern California. And the comment that was made by the staff people was, all of the work that we're doing is within the parameters that were set up by the 2020 urban water management plans throughout our entire service area. Now, the implications of this are huge because the directors at Metropolitan keep saying you can't make a plan for the future using outdated population figures. Population figures are going down, water usage is going down. So this is something that could be very, very interesting this coming year. And I would recommend that we continue working on that. And if everybody just nods their head, yes, we'll go on to the next topic. Everybody good with that? Oh, good. All right, moving on. Suggest we talked about continuing monitoring the water authority, the Colorado River situation, the Tijuana River pollution crisis, legislation in Sacramento, and health and water climate change issues. And I'm assuming we're all good with that. Everybody nod your head, yes. Moving on. I hate to push this along, but we do have some other things we have to do. And then potential action topics. There were 3 things that were brought up, and I need some guidance here. Explore ways to help increase government attention to the Tijuana River situation. We had 3 things that we talked about we could do. We could talk to the State Climate Change Committee about successful ways to do this. This was Carol Parker's suggestion. Since SEAC attends monthly regional group meetings on this issue, continue to follow that group's actions and recommendations, contribute as possible. That came from Ruth. And then third was educate the other local leagues in California about the Tijuana River crisis to promote support for remediation. It has been suggested that we try to do a workshop for the state convention. It's going to be a virtual convention and we could do it. I'm a little worried that most of the state is not going to be focusing on this issue. Seems to me to be a pretty local issue. So I'm not sure that that's a good idea. So I need some guidance from the rest of you. Anybody have anything to say about that?
Well, it's too bad that that is seen around the state with the water people as a local issue. I think that's
Yeah,
our problem.
I do.
Is that, it's all about the Delta, the Colorado River. And then even when I bring this up to people, in the north and in the Sacramento, and yeah, but it's not like what they're involved in all the time. It's not in front of their faces.
Right.
So it's true, it's seen as a local issue, but it's a big water issue. I mean, it's a tragedy that we took care of people who were poor in the Central Valley who were drinking water with nitrates, and finally got an environmental justice movement going, but it took a long time. This is kind of the same way. If we don't put it on agendas and bring attention to it, it'll keep languishing. I don't
But
know.
you're suggesting we keep this, Rita.
I think we should keep throwing it in the rest of the state's face and say, hey, this is big.
This is big. Okay, I'm agreeable with that. Does anybody else have any comments on that point? Ruth?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I think we have to make it a state issue. And it's a water issue, it's a children's health issue, it's an international issue, it's a military issue. I mean, the Navy SEALs can't train there. It's a border
They
issue.
won't help us.
No, I know they won't, but doesn't mean we can't try. I mean, the cross-border patrol gets sick every time they have to go into the river. It's a huge issue.
Thank you,
And I
Ruth.
think we should work on it. But that being said, I'm not going to be around this summer to help.
I know that. I know exactly what you're up to and it's all good.
Okay.
We'll manage. Okay,
And I just want to add
go
to,
ahead, Rachel.
I just think also beach cities just have an extra interest because I bet that there were studies at red tides that come from that and probably in fact all the way through LA County, I would imagine. I don't know for sure, obviously, but I would say beach cities that have people that are ocean ecosystem aware would have more interest. So that's another way maybe to talk to the whole state.
Okay, that makes sense.
And
Can I just throw a thought in on the number one, the climate change committee? I just want us to be aware that all of these climate change groups are going to be in jeopardy with the administration's policies. So we need to be strategic about how we continue to support them and interact with them under any other name that would smell as sweet.
I love it. Ruth, I'm sorry, Mary Lou.
Hi, thanks. I just wanted to, I sent this to you, Anne, and maybe you can forward it to the group that we proposed, well, you read this, you you edited this with us. But we proposed to the League of Women Voters San Diego program planning that they make the Tijuana River an area of emphasis for the League of Women Voters California. And just so you guys know, this is going to be voted on by, there's only two proposals because I found that out today. One is on immigration and the other one is ours. And Anne, you are welcome to circulate that email or the attachment, whatever you'd like, to the committee. Just so you know, we would very much like your vote on this. And I guess you have to be, I'm not really sure.
You have to be at the meeting. Yeah.
No, you don't have to be at the meeting. They're going to ask
Oh.
everybody to vote, is my
Oh.
understanding. But if you
I did
can't
not know that.
meeting, please do. I guess my hesitation was, if you're North County, can you vote in League of Women Voters San Diego?
No.
Um,
No, we cannot. We've already voted at our program planning.
okay. Okay, well, we have a bedroom here in our house that you can temporarily put your
You're so funny.
I just want you guys, we'll circulate this and we'll send it to you so you have the date. It's Monday, February 10th is the meeting on this, where you can vote. And because we think that education, number one, we got to get education on the website at the League of Women Voters California. Like, as you say, this is becoming more of a state issue. I mean, they're going to purge EPA and maybe get rid of EPA, very much like they're doing with the educational department and USAID. I mean, this is a serious coup going on right now. But nevertheless, you've
Yes.
got to protect what you can. And the League of Women Voters California is incredibly effective legislatively, and we use their help for SB 10. And so I just really hope we can beat out the immigration people. Our proposal
No,
is
you can do both, Mary Lou. You don't have to beat them out.
Yeah, I think we recommend 3.
oh, you can do 3. Well, there's only,
I
so
think it's 3.
maybe both of them go anywhere if there's only
Yeah.
2. I have no idea.
Well, I think they're both huge issues, and some people will be, going one way and some the other. It'd be smart to support both, in my opinion. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to keep that on the list. And now we're going to ask you, are there any other areas that you particularly want us to keep an eye on? Because that's a pretty full cup, folks.
Yes.
Yes, Mary Lou.
Sorry, I just want to add this because recently the Trump administration ordered the U.S. Army of Engineers to release water from several dams
Yeah.
for no apparent reason. And they said it was to get water to Los Angeles, but none of that water went to Los Angeles.
Right.
And now we're behind in water, which the valley uses in the summertime. And so I think this interference with California, San Diego, if they could do the same thing anywhere in the state, it looks like how do we fight back against this? I think this is something we should think about.
Yeah, we talked about that while we were waiting for everybody to join the meeting. I don't know that I was saying that what I'm reading is that the people who support the administration now are, they only read what is sent out by the administration and they don't read anything else. Sue.
I would suggest 2 things. One is, with regard to that last comment, is I think we could find out where there are federal agencies that are managing a water body. Those were Bureau of Reclamation managed or Army Corps. They would be subject, but a lot of the waters in California are managed by others. So it might be strategic to understand where those are. The The other thing I was going to suggest is kind of different. It's kind of going back to Rachel's question about what we can do with the corporations at Tijuana Valley. I don't know if League of Women Voters does this, but could we put comments to board meetings for those corporations and raise it at the board meetings of the corporations and just say, you know, this is happening. There's discharges. Your company is part of the waste stream in that area, and we want you to improve your practices. Again, the same way you would with like child labor laws or something.
You know, there's a variation on that going around. Ruth, did you want to comment on that? There is talk about trying to organize a boycott of any of the businesses which are on the other side of the border polluting. But I think the problem is we don't know quite who they are yet. That's our issue. Ruth?
I haven't talked to anybody who's involved in organizing a boycott, but at our next environmental justice meeting for SEAC at the end of February, that's on the agenda, and I will have a list. I will have Dr. Prather's list.
Okay.
So, and that's a good list to start with. It's pretty long.
Yeah.
Is there a
But-
way to make sure that we know that they are discharging in, I mean, I think anything that happens in Tijuana is going to ultimately come across the border.
Yeah.
And make them make them aware that we know that they're discharging in Tijuana and it's part of what's coming across the border and we don't like it. Again,
You know what would probably be infinitely more useful in the long run would be to get an article like in the LA Times or one of the Washington Post or newspaper of that stature about this issue, specifically highlighting who knows somebody at the LA Times? Anybody?
It's really hard. We've Stephanie and I, my co-author of our book, we've been pitching them on some stuff, and you know, we'll keep trying. But
Does anybody know
they
Ian
want to
James?
submit anything, they're open to you submitting things and
Yeah.
contacting them. It's just that, you know.
Yeah, but I like to have reporters talk to you. I mean, because, if you can get a reporter interested, that's not a bad idea. We're going to have to think about that idea because I think we might be able to build a really interesting proposal for a story.
Well, George Skelton he just wrote a really good article that Trump is dumb, whatever, on this whole Central Valley water thing. And he is really good. And I mean, you know, I can pitch him that he ought to take a look at
Well, yeah, if we could get him, to talk to someone like Ruth, who's really knowledgeable, and Mary Lou, who has the health background. I mean, those two together ought to be able to convince anybody.
well, he should, but there's so much going on. It truly is like a fire hose.
I know.
Right now it is.
And
But there have been some great editorials in the San Diego
Have it.
Union, and maybe we should go back and review some of those and those authors, and maybe they have connections with the Times or larger publications.
Okay, let's
There-
work on that.
there was also articles about the DDT dumping offshore, and they were written by somebody a staff writer at the LA Times.
Yeah,
Her name
Ian
is Rosanna XIA.
I think it's
Yeah.
pronounced Shaw.
Okay, I'm just thinking I don't know her at all, but she
She wrote a
obviously
book
is.
called California Against the Sea, which is outstanding.
Oh, you
It's
mentioned
on
that before.
climate
Okay,
change. Yeah.
maybe we should reach out to her, get her to talk about her book at a meeting, and then ask her if she could follow up on this.
That's not a bad idea. I could do
everybody
that.
likes to pitch their book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have
would like
Actually, our league book group is reading that book for our February book group. At my
California
recommendation, I'm happy to say. Woohoo. Yeah, maybe this is all going to work out. All right.
I want to second Sue's suggestion that we do some research on what federal oversight there is of waterways here.
It's the Bureau of Reclamation, Mary Lou. It's not going to be hard to hunt down because we know who controls everything else. So it's
Well,
the
the
Central
Army
Valley
Corps of
Project,
Engineer
right?
also.
Need to write it up so we understand as a group, so
Yeah.
that if there is San Diego, I don't know this, I don't know the answer to this, so I think fighting back is always only possible with knowledge and
Right.
So that's what I would suggest for us.
I think that's right. And Sue and I are having a little meeting on Friday, so we can maybe
I
make that
thought we were
part.
eating pastries, not working.
Well, we can do two things at one time. Okay. Anybody have any other suggestions? Then I'm thinking, let me work on getting this all written up for everybody. And we're going to officially adopt this as our program for the year. And I will get to work on getting speakers for these various issues. But I think, you know, I am really in love with the idea of asking the author to come and talk to us. I don't know that she would, but she might. And she is a reporter for the LA Times.
Perfect.
Yeah. You know, this all might work.
Do, good.
Okay. Any other questions? We're not going to be able to have time to do our monitoring reports again. I swear to God, next meeting, all you're going to do is do monitoring reports. You people have to know what's going on around here besides, you know, what we get so interested in one topic, we never move on to all the other things we're supposed to be keeping track of. I don't know what to say.
Overwhelming things happening right now, so it's understandable.
It's oh, Rita, you are such a good influence on me. I love it. Thank you, everybody. Rachel, can you just stay for a minute and tell me, do I have your email? Because I don't know that I'm sending an email to your address, or am I? And I don't know it.
I think you do, but I can make sure.
Yeah, would you check and then send me an email if
you.
it's something else? Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye,
you for
thank
coming
you,
in. Sue,
everybody.
thank you
Bye.
again.
Bye.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Oh, I don't think I sent anything to Rachel at Super.
Fine, I'm not new. I'm new, so I was on.
Okay. So I don't know how
And
you've
I'm
got.
in North County. I registered in North County.
Okay, Rachel at Super Good. That's all one word.
Yeah, .com.
Good vibes.
Do you live in North County?
Yeah, I live in Oceanside.
Oh, good,
Oceanside.
good.
So,
Oceanside.
and you know, I'm not on this listserv either for the water group. You could just add
Oh,
me.
I'm sorry, Posey. I will add
I
you.
just jumped in, so. But you know who else I was thinking before Ruth left? Mackenzie Elmer, the voice of San Diego. She's been really involved in the.
She's
Tijuana.
wonderful. And you know who knows her really
Great.
well? The one
And
who
someone
knows
that-
her is Rita. Rita and she are
Oh,
good
okay,
friends.
there you go. She'd be good. She's good.
We can do this.
Okay.
And
I
so
hope so.
I'm
guess
in.
she'll
Go ahead,
stop.
Rachel.
I'm in some climate groups that I don't know if you can do open lectures where you can invite more people if the author would be more interested in it. Or
I
I
could-
could
Oh, yeah.
invite like that group to our Zoom. You know what I mean? The Zooms are public, right? So you
Yeah.
could say that you're gonna expect more people. Like you could say like, oh, we're gonna expect like 20 people or something. You know, I
Oh.
don't know if that
Well, you
works.
know, if we invite our book group and we invite your group and we invite
Our group.
Carol
both of the
belongs to
groups.
tons
Yeah,
of
that'd be a lot.
climate change groups.
And
And
Carol's group.
yeah,
that-
we had
yeah.
over 50 people come and talk, listen to Dr. Prather talk about
Great,
the
yeah.
Tijuana River. It's no problem.
Yeah, I was
So-
just gonna say if it whatever helps you sell it, we could try and do that
I like your attitude. I
Yeah,
need to
good
talk to
plan.
you. What's your what's your phone number, Rachel?
It's 615.
615?
Yeah, it's from Nashville, Tennessee, that zip code. That's
Oh,
where I
okay.
got my first cell phone. First and only. 615-618-0816.
0816. I'm gonna call you.
Okay, I look forward
I'm
to it.
sorry, you're doomed.
Rosie, good to see you too. Okay.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Ann. Bye.
Thank you, Carol.
Bye.
Thanks for doing the Zoom.
Mm.
Bye, everybody.